My kids tell me I'm supposed to look cool. Am I doing it?
Sounds good.
I told him I was.
I'll call you up when I.
Do what? Beth. Beth Robinson.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, yeah. We'll check the stream in a little bit. Once
I will get louder than that. Whenever I speak, just speaking naturally, I do this. Okay?
so we'll
Good morning and welcome to the N.A.P conference. It's Saturday morning and hopefully you didn't misinterpret N.A.P as time to take a nap. I actually had somebody reach out to me and say, we are planning to take a nap on Saturday morning. Is that what you were referring to? And I was like, no, it's non-anxious presence or non-anxious parenting. For all those of you who are joining us on Facebook or YouTube right now, we're so glad that you're joining us. And get to be a part of this live stream with us. And to let all of you know that you may be watching this live or maybe watching this later, we're going to make sure it's cut and edited and put out for you guys to follow up on. Because like most people on a Saturday, we've got sports, we've got things going on in our lives that are keeping us busy and also causing us anxiety. And so we want to make sure that you get a chance to hear what our great speakers have to say and what they have to offer. Even though you can't be here in person, that's totally okay. We've got a great lineup for you. This is our first annual conference, and I'm excited about who we've got speaking. Beth Robinson from LCU, David Fraze from LCU, and Kevin Huddleston from all over the state of Texas. These are veterans in working with teens and children who've given me a lot of blessing throughout the years and helped me understand what it means to be a non-anxious presence. But I want to start off this morning with just a real quick example of what we're going to be hopefully exploring with you guys today, this idea of a non-anxious presence. Imagine yourself heading down the highway and you find yourself involved in a wreck, laying on the ground, maybe severely injured, and the paramedics show up. What kind of paramedic do you want to arrive next to you in the middle of your trauma and pain? Well, imagine one that comes up, looks at you, and totally freaks out. Imagine one that walks up to you and says, what were you doing? How could you be so ignorant? Why did you crash into this? Or why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? You put yourself in this situation and it looks like you're going to die. I don't think we can do anything to help you. Imagine that paramedic. What's going to happen to you is your anxiety is going to go up, your heart rate's going to go up, and you're most likely going to perish from your injuries. But imagine the paramedic that walks up, assesses the situation, sees the trauma going on, and is a calming presence. We're going to do our best to help you. We've got people on the way that are going to take care of you. We're going to take you through a process that is hopefully going to lead to your healing today. Don't worry about your car. Don't worry about your family. We'll make sure and communicate with them. But a non-anxious presence, your chances of survival are going to go way up. And as parents and those who work with children and teens, that's what we are called to be. We are called to be the foundation that our kids stand on when the traumas hit, when the tough times come, when the bullying comes, when the identity problems come, which every kid struggles with it. You struggled with at one point in your life. And what you need is somebody. It's not going to necessarily be soft with you, but somebody who's going to be stable, who's going to be calm, who's not going to let your anxiety affect them. That's who we are called to be. And this morning, we're going to get some practical tools this morning and through this afternoon about how you as parents, about how educators, grandparents, guardians of any kind can help make that happen. And I'm excited this morning to kick off with Dr. Beth Robinson. I had the blessing of meeting Beth quite a few years ago working on a youth ministry conference, and Beth gives her time to work with youth ministers and those who work with teens and speak to them about things that are going on in the field of psychology. She's a doctor of psychology, and the cool thing about Beth is Beth has been in foster care and adoption for over a lot of years, like maybe not as long as I've been alive, but pretty close. And she's fostered over 15 kids, has adopted 3. She's got some grandkids out there that are awesome and amazing. And Beth has really made it her career to work in the field of trauma with kids. And we'll be bringing us some research this morning about that. I'm so glad you get to join us. Let's welcome Beth Robinson to the stage.
I'm supposed to talk about social media, but I'm going to start at something that seems very unrelated, okay? What would you feed your kids during a day? What kind of food? Open question to you. I mean, when I grew up, my dad fixed breakfast, and he fixed a lot of eggs, to be honest. And French toast, I remember oatmeal. And my dad fixed breakfast because my mom went to work. And then we always ate lunch at school, and I remember who our cafeteria lady was. Her name was Mrs. Creasy. She made the best homemade rolls in the world. But you know, we had a balanced meal on that tray that we carried at school. And then in the evenings, my parents did something that seems very archaic today. We all sat around a table together and we ate something that was like meat, potatoes, and vegetables. Does that sound vaguely familiar? We had snacks like apples and bananas. Now, I want to say to you, I have a confession. I'm probably still allergic to ice cream, but I was very allergic to ice cream as a kid. My favorite food right now is peanut butter ice cream. Love it. Love peanut butter ice cream. Now, if I said to you that I am going to allow a teenager in my home to eat ice cream for breakfast, and then ice cream for lunch, and ice cream for supper, what would you think of my parenting? Not good, right? Not good. We would recognize that that is not healthy for us to do for our kids, and we would regulate it, wouldn't we? We would regulate it. We would say, you can't eat that. For instance, you can't have candy bars for every meal in the day. We would say that. And yet I find parents who are very unwilling to regulate technology and social media, as though their children have convinced them they are entitled to social media. I work a lot with traumatized kids, and we discovered something. We're a little ahead of the research, and I'm going to share the research with you in a minute, but we were a little ahead of the research because we discovered pretty quickly something unique with aggression in our foster kids. I was working with a 9-year-old that in his biological home, he had been allowed to play a lot of video games. And he still wanted a lot of access to technology. But he was literally hitting, kicking, cussing out foster parents. He also did this thing to irritate them where he would, in the middle of the night, he would get up and he would go find anything he could that was a cleaning substance or anything else, and he would just mix it in together, and he called it making goo. Well, when we cut back his technology, an amazing thing happened. He wasn't nearly so angry and agitated. So there's a lot of research to back that now that shows that this constant input of technology and social media is negative for kids. So I'm going to share with you that 90% of 13 to 17-year-olds have social media, and often have social media that we're not actively involved in and monitoring. 90%. The average teenager in America spends 9 hours a day on screens that does not include academic work. Did you hear that? 9 hours that does not include academic work. Pediatricians for at least the last 10 years have recommended 1 hour of screen time for kids. 1 hour. And our kids are getting 9. So, why is it that the people who actually helped create these platforms don't even allow their own children to be on social media? They understand that these platforms were built with an addictive quality to them. So they don't allow their children on social media. In fact, the individual who helped develop the logistics and all behind Facebook said, "We intentionally created it so that likes and responses to your postings would impact you neurologically in your pleasure center, and you would become addicted to social media." I'm going to share with you a little bit about parents and social media now. I talked to an elementary principal in an affluent school district around Lubbock, okay? And she said, this is the first year they have had pre-K and kindergarten kids come with no social imprinting, is what she called it. These kids don't recognize what other kids who have come to school previously recognized. They don't recognize what a box of goldfish looks like. They don't know what a Lego box looks like. And we're kind of attributing that to what's happened since COVID. which is we've got a whole lot of young parents who, through no fault of their own in many circumstances, are working from home with their kids, and they're on screens, and their kids are on screens. And as a result, they're not getting the social interactions. We now know that when an 18-year-old comes to college at Lubbock Christian University and they sit in my general psychology class, we now know that they have the same number of social interactions as previous college students had by age 6. I want you to think about that. That's the impact of screen time. Our kids aren't getting this. They aren't getting the interaction socially where they're talking to people and developing socially and emotionally. If they don't get that, the parts of their brain that have to do with regulating anxiety and depression don't develop. So now we're sending freshmen in college out into the world, well, not actually into the world much anymore, to be honest. They're pretty sheltered by parents, but we're sending them to college with the social and emotional development of elementary school kids previously. And then we wonder why they're anxious and depressed. I shared this research with my general psychology class this year. I've shared it for about the last 4 or 5 years because it's been out there. And usually my freshmen would argue back. This year, they did not argue back. And I stopped and I said, "Aren't you guys going to tell me I'm wrong?" And they said, "No, we think you're exactly right. We know we're depressed. We know we're anxious. We know we haven't had these things." And they're agreeing with it. Some research said that 56% of teenagers in any given period of time right now are thinking about killing themselves. 56%. That's a huge number, and I guess they're finding really good solutions on social media. So I'm going to back up and hit parents a little bit here, and I'm going to say, how much are you on social media? How much time are you spending not making conversation with your kids because you're busy looking at a screen? The first thing we have to do as parents to provide for our kids is we have got to get a grip on our own addictive behavior. In fact, I read an article as I prepared for this that actually called social media our next public health crisis, right up there with child abuse. Public health crisis. So let me explain to you a little bit of the neurology of what happens with not just social media, but gaming and screen time. Here's what happens. Those activities are designed to go directly to the pleasure center of your brain and increase your dopamine. All you need to know about dopamine to understand this is it makes you feel really good. Dopamine makes you feel good. It's a upper and you love it. It's the same thing that happens if you play a slot machine and the slot machine pays off. Dopamine gets released. So every time that you're playing video games or on social media and you're getting likes, dopamine gets released. Which means when you set down your device or move away from it, dopamine quits being released and you get irritable, angry, upset, and sad. And so we have this process going on all the time where kids and adults want to stay on the social media because it's feeding dopamine. And the minute you step away from it, you don't feel good. And in fact, to be able to break that cycle, you really have to do a technology fast and get away from it. You have to step completely away from it and get sober. Get away from that social media, the technology. Your kids need that equally bad. Your kids, and the thing that's going on when we're jacking around with their dopamine that way is we're actually setting them up to be more addictive personalities throughout their life. Understand that dopamine is just like a drug high for our kids. It is our legally sanctioned addiction right now for children. So for our kids to get control of it, we have to get control of it. And so before we go any further talking about this, we have to say, what are your habits? How much time are you on social media? This is streaming on Facebook right now. social media. But you're not getting likes on social media. So if you can listen through this and not have to scroll and see if people liked your post, maybe you're not quite so addicted. How much time are you spending on screens? And in that way, abandoning your children emotionally and socially by not being present with them. Perhaps your kids are anxious because you're not available, because you're on social media. And perhaps your kids are anxious because they're on social media. So we have to back away from it completely. So I have talked about the extent of the issue now. So what do we do about it? Well, we think about what we do about food for our kids. We regulate it. So when your kid says, but everyone's on social media, all of my friends are there. I hear it all the time from parents. I mean, it is horrific that you are cutting your children off socially from their friends when all their friends are on social media. The truth is, we have a generation of kids who don't know how to do it the old-fashioned way, where we had friendships where you actually got together and did something, okay? So the first thing I'm going to say to you as parents is, you're going to have to teach your kids, and to be honest, we've got some parents who have grown up with social media being all the connections. You're going to have to go old school. You know, way back, like me. I tell my college students, you know, like 1902, and I hope those of you listening can calculate, I'm really not, 119 years old. But we need to go old school a little bit, because there's a lot of value to inviting kids into our home, our kids' friends, and them engaging in activities together that are not screen related. We used to do things like play card games, board games, dominoes, craft projects. Does any of that sound familiar? That's what we need to teach our kids to do so they can develop social relationships. Or maybe even when they're out at an event that's planned, they're going to watch a football game, a basketball game, or they're hanging out with their friends at church. Maybe we should say to them, put down your device. Pay attention to what's happening around you. It's okay as a parent to say, no, you can't have access to technology. I read a case study where it was an adult, and it was a gaming addiction he had, where his counselor recognized that, in fact, no, it's a psychiatrist who did this. Psychiatrist published an article, and he said he no longer immediately puts young adults on antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. Instead, he has them do a technology fast and see if it will re-regulate their anxiety and depression before he will medicate now. And typically, it works. And in addition to that, the young adults he's working with often find that the most they can use technology without it being addictive again is maybe an hour or two a week, as far as gaming, social media, those things that spike dopamine. Because to be honest, their homework does not do that for them, okay? So even psychiatrists are recognizing what we're doing neurologically to our kids. So here are the guidelines I generally give about social media technology in general. First of all, we all need sleep, we all need rest. All technology goes to bed at night. Our kids get in more trouble on technology when they have access to it at night. And even if you trust your kids, I'm going to tell you, lock it up. Kids will do a lot. Good kids will do a lot to get access to technology, to talk to their friends. So get your charging station, whatever, run a cord into a closet, put a lock on it, lock it up. Sounds extreme, I know, but trust me, it will save you a lot of heartache. So all technology goes to bed. You need to monitor technology. That doesn't mean just looking at it. I am not smart enough at my 119 years of age to monitor my kids' technology. They can get around me. So I have to use software to monitor what they're doing. And the thing I love about that is when I use that kind of technology, I get to open up conversations with my kids. I get to say, okay, This sent me this warning and it said you were doing this. Let's take a look at that and let's talk about what that means and what that is. I'll be honest, I have my monitoring set to basically G-rated. So I get a lot of flags that aren't terrible behavior, but they open up conversations for me to have with a kid. So we've got to monitor technology, we've got to put it to sleep, and we've got to be willing to have very angry, anxious, upset kids when we first start regulating it if they've had access. Remember, they're going through withdrawals. Literally, they're going through withdrawals. They're going to be angry, they're going to be anxious, they're going to have trouble sleeping, all those kind of things because we've been feeding them dopamine. So we have to get that back under control. You know, and most of the social media also has effects that we haven't even explored yet today because of time limits, which are effects on how our kids develop identity, what they think is real and not real, because social media presents a very unreal world, okay? There are a lot of perfect people on social media. There are no perfect people in my house. There are no perfect people in the groups of people I hang out with at church. And social media also shows kids that they can make a lot of money and just be on social media. I'm not putting that down because I know there are people who literally make a living making videos for TikTok for companies and for themselves. But I'm not sure that I want my kid to think that's the way they're going to make their living. Just like I wouldn't have wanted them to think they were going to be a rock star back in the day. I want them to have a realistic assessment of what it takes to do that. So, and I also want to say, you know, the social media is very, I want to say kind of anti-Christian as a general rule. It teaches a lot of things very subtly that I don't want my kids to learn. I don't want my kids to believe that their value comes from how many likes they get on social media. I want them to understand that their value comes in their relationship with God. I don't believe in a lot of what we talk about in counseling about self-esteem, self-concept, all of that. I believe that our sense of self and identity should not come from me. It should come from our connection with God. And I think the best thing that we can do for our kids is raise our kids so they have a sense of ministry and mission that is directly connected to their relationship with God. And then once they're that connected with God, that's how they navigate the world. Please let me know if you find that on social media. Not trying to, I really want to know, because if there's something like that, I would want to channel my kids that direction. But we have a lot of teenagers raising teenagers on social media is what we've got going on. So take a few moments. Go look at what your kids are watching on social media. Look at it with them and think about what they're learning from it. Ask what they're learning from social media. Because when you do that, you'll have a much greater appreciation of where your kids' values are coming from. Because in this day and time, most of their values are not coming from just peers like it was back in previous generations, because back then we interacted with our peers. Remember that statistic? Our kids aren't interacting with their peers, they're interacting on social media, which is setting the guidelines for them about what relationships are like and what the world is like. And it's not a real world, and it's not a godly world. So I want to encourage all of you as parents to grab hold and recognize, just like feeding your kids ice cream every day for every meal is not good for your kids, giving your kids unbridled access to social media is not good for your kids.
Beth, thank you. Why don't you come over here and have a seat? We are going to move into a time of Q&A. The simplest way to do that for you watching online is to scan that QR code you're going to see on the bottom of your screen right now. You'll select the N.A.P. conference at the bottom of that. It may ask you a few questions if this is your first time to access it. And then after you go through the process, at the very bottom, there will be a little button that says submit message. Click that button, and then you can ask questions. Those are going to get sent directly up here to me, and I will be able to go to those in just a couple of minutes. And just so that you know, if you're watching live right now, you're on about a 2-minute delay. And so get those questions out, get them out now. We're going to spend a few minutes asking Beth some questions. And we'll take some live questions from the audience as well in just a moment. Beth, thank you so much. You gave a whole lot of nuggets in this, a whole lot of information. And the purpose of this conference is really to try to be a help to parents. And one of the things that you said that I as a therapist run into a lot, and I want you to, if you could expound a little bit on this, is the need for parents to push through their kids' anxiety, their anger, their frustration when you tell them no. Talk a little bit more about it. Do you see parents a lot that just can't do that?
Yes, and I'm going to say we have to reframe for parents what that anxiety and anger means. Whenever I work with parents and we're trying to set up systems to help regulate their kids' behaviors, I say, that tells me you're getting it right. And so parents need to recognize that you need to be calm when you do it, so that the anger is not about you getting angry with the kid, but if you're a calm presence when you give them a boundary or you say no, then them getting angry or anxious says, you're getting it right, parent.
Okay. Yeah, I think you articulating that it's an addiction, that you're stopping an addiction. And most parents out there have probably never had to intervene with somebody who's coming out of an addiction. They've never had to deal with that like a therapist might or like a doctor might. They have to be, I think, kind of, it may feel kind of harsh to kind of deal with that because you're causing somebody pain, right?
You are, and as a parent, I might say to you, this is a good time maybe to go ahead and seek some support with a youth minister or another counselor to kind of help you walk through that, because it might feel harsh to you because you are denying your kids something and their reaction to it will seem extreme. So
let's just go a little deeper here, because I'm imagining in my head, I've got a son, who's 11 years old, and quite often when I say to him, it's time to get off the iPad, or it's time to quit playing the games, if he's addicted, then what I should see then is him get very angry very quick.
That's correct. He will get angry and not want to stop what he's doing.
And then what I do, because I'm being vulnerable right now, is that I get angry that he's angry, right? I'm like, quit being angry. I just asked you to do one small little thing and you can't even do that. And he's amped and he's anxious and he's angry. And now I'm amped, anxious, and angry. And now this interaction is a negative interaction. And I think what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that we should expect that our kids are going to be angry. They're going to not want to do what we're asking them to do when it comes to social media. And that if we do that consistently, push through that, and we do it with a calm manner, that we should be able to get them out of that addictive cycle. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. You should be able to. And I'm going to say to you, you need to stay calm as a parent. When a kid gets amped like that about getting off of something, that should be the moment that you kind of step back and go, okay, my child has too much access to this. It's too hard for them to leave it. So I need to calmly step back and set new guidelines for when this technology or social media is used, and be ready for your kids to be pretty upset.
Okay.
They may spend some time in their room or spend some time slamming a door and doing those kind of behaviors, but you've got to let them work through that until they can be calm.
Because you're dealing with an addict.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, okay. We got a question from one of our parents. He says this: you mentioned the idea of a technology fast. How long do you think that needs to happen? What's the length of time? Hopefully not 60 to 90 days like you do with some addictions, but maybe that's the case. And then we'll follow. He's got a second one to follow up on that, but talk a little bit more about that.
I would say it's going to take a minimum of 2 weeks.
Okay.
A lot of adults will fast off for a week, but I think it's going to take a minimum of 2 weeks. And the way that you will know when it's okay to talk about very limited use of technology again is when your kid can re-regulate their emotions.
Okay.
So if your kid is still all over the board, they're angry, they're anxious, they can't seem to regulate their emotions, continue the fast.
Okay. And then would that fast just be for social media? Would it be everything electronic? I thought I heard you say, and again, I think it's a good clarification question here, that doing homework on a Chromebook or something like that may be required for school, it's not providing that same dopamine release to those kids. So in some ways, I mean, what might be a good metaphor? It's good food versus ice cream, or
Yes.
something like. I mean, could you talk a little more about that fasting?
You know, if you're doing homework, that's like eating steak and potatoes.
Okay.
There's typically not things built in that are addictive into homework that your kids would do online. And in this day and time, they're going to have that access. The challenge for you is going to be to watch it closely enough to make sure they're not gaming and they're not on social media,
Okay.
which are the two big ones.
And you mentioned technology. Do you have a particular type of technology you use to monitor this stuff, like a software, an app that you might suggest, or
I use Bark.
Bark?
Bark.
B-A-R-K, Bark.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it does cost, I think, about $10 a month.
Okay.
But it goes, I plug my kids' devices into it. It goes into the iOS, and it sees where all they're going, and it regulates that. It follows them on social media. It alerts me to all kinds of things.
Okay, well, that's a great little tidbit there. And then you also talked a little bit about some very specific things that parents can do. And one of those things that you mentioned, other than adding some software to their life maybe, or regulating the kid more directly, was to check their own social media addiction. Any advice on how to do that in a world, much like the kids' world, where maybe their interactions with their neighborhood are on social media, or their church are on social media? What suggestions might you give?
I think it's like any other addictive behavior. What I would say is start keeping a log of when you're online and what you're doing. Because if you can get online and check what's going on with the church and that kind of thing, that's great. Those same organizations will send you emails. And so you can check that way too. But I think you need to be logging what you're doing once you get online. I'll be honest and tell you, has never really appealed to me. I can't believe people spend as much time on Facebook and all as they do. I get on it, I get off of it. I mean, there are days I'm not on it. It's very functional for me. I follow former students, things like that. But I think you need to start logging your own behavior.
Okay.
Take a look at it.
One of our online parents says, as a parent, how do you get rid of your own addiction, which is kind of what I was asking there. And specifically, they've used video games to relax. So after they've had a hard day of work, they might play video games for a while. I know that my kids notice this. It's my downtime. How much damage have I done? And in turn, how can it be resolved? I mean, how long does it take, do you think, for a parent to set up some new behaviors for a kid to get those learned behaviors back in? Or is this going to be one of those temptations that goes with them for life? What are your thoughts on that? And you may not know the answer to that. But.
My gut instinct is it may always be tempting, but as a parent, I'm going to say to you, get off the gaming. When you come home, even if that relaxes you, there are other things that can relax you. You can take your kids for a walk. You can take your kids to the park. Try sunshine, vitamin D, exercise to relax, which are a lot healthier. Please get off the gaming, because the other thing is all that time you're spending gaming, you're not emotionally present for your kids.
Mm-hmm. And I do want you to kind of reiterate some stuff about your values. You mentioned that from your perspective, social media tends to be anti-Christian. The idea that you get on, it's registering in these kids' minds this dopamine release. They're getting value about themselves from it. In turn, they become devalued as well if stuff doesn't get likes, or people don't want to listen to what they have to say, or even worse, they actually come back and they disagree with them or attack them. That their foundation, from what I'm hearing you say, that social foundation that some of us older folks would have gotten from interacting with people in person, they're now getting that online, and it's extremely fickle, maybe, extremely volatile. Is that a better word, maybe? That it's just constantly could be left or right, high or low. And that's partly what we as parents are seeing in our kids with this anxiety and depression.
Well, and the other thing about it is it's not really a relationship. Our kids think it is. But it's really not a relationship.
It's pseudo, it's fake.
Yes, it's a fake relationship.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting. A colleague of mine went to Spain with students from LCU, and the thing that she noticed is they all took 50 selfies at everything that they went to see. They didn't see it. They were busy getting their picture. at the
Interesting.
site,
Interesting.
which is, again, self-focused. And so in some ways, the other thing that our social media is teaching our kids is to be selfish.
Egocentric.
Yes. Instead of exploring the world, they're busy making sure their picture looks good on social media.
Do you think, from your perspective, parenting has gotten any easier, gotten any harder? Or do you think it's just different?
I think it's harder. I think
Okay.
it's a lot harder because kids have access to a lot more knowledge through the internet and a lot more influences. Used to be our influences were in our neighborhood, in our churches, people that we allowed in our home. Technology allows people in our home that we would never allow to walk through our front door were they there
Interesting.
in person.
Interesting. Yeah. So it is a much harder thing to do as a parent. Let me see here. I've got one more question that's come in. How would you approach neurodiverse kids that use technology, especially when they don't have the ability to handle, change, or regulate their own emotions? And so maybe these are kids that have some diagnosed disorders, Asperger's, spectrum, something like that. How would you address that?
I've had to address it as
Okay.
a counselor.
Okay.
I work with a couple of neurodiverse kids that actually, when they lived with their biological families, they came home from school, got on an iPad, and were on it all night. I
Okay.
mean, from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 6 o'clock in the morning, and then slept through school. And what we did is we cut it way back, and we also helped them find activities that emulated it. So like Minecraft is online Legos, folks.
Okay.
So what we discovered is, our kids who loved Minecraft, we could teach them to play with Legos, or we could teach them to play with clay. And so those neurodiverse kids need to be reintroduced to things tactile things that they can do that will emulate the neurological engagement.
Okay, awesome. I do want to ask, is there any live questions that we want to have from the audience? Anybody want to reach out? Kevin, you want to just stand up and I'll repeat your question so that it can be heard online. So our question is about texting. So we're not necessarily dealing with the likes on Facebook or Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok that you kind of talked about in your speech there, but in terms of just these conversations that go back and forth with these kids, how does that factor into kind of what you're talking about?
I don't think it has the dopamine impact.
Okay.
But I think it has the relational impact.
Okay.
Here's what I'm going to say. Why are we not getting those kids together?
Okay.
If they want to be interacting, why are we not putting them together face to face? I mean, we have so many kids now who are going home and they're alone in their rooms interacting on technology. Why are we not, as parents, creating time and space to get kids together again? So what I would want to see with all that group texting, instead of doing all that group texting, let's limit that and let's invite those kids together to do something face-to-face. Neurologically, it is so much better for them. All those things they're saying on texting, first of all, they wouldn't say face-to-face, or if they would, we need to teach them social skills, and we need to get them together face-to-face. And I think the reason we're not getting kids together face-to-face like we used to is it takes commitment from parents.
Well, I think that, Beth, and I'll just echo, as somebody else who's worked with teenagers for a long time, that comment that you made about the freshmen coming in, having as many social interactions as a 6-year-old. As somebody who works with teens, who was trained to work with teens, really from a 90s perspective, which is a little before these things came out in 2007, 2008 time, I see that. And I think one of the more difficult things that we experience as parents is forcing our kids to interact socially. And we weren't trained to force anybody to interact socially. Like, I don't remember growing up, my mom telling me, you have to go play with your friends. Like, I mean, it was, if anything, it's like, can you stay home and talk to your parents? And to look at my kid, and I've experienced this, where I'm like, you go play with your friends. Like, can we call a friend and go play with their, that anxiety that they feel. And I would have never guessed what you said about that their interactions as a freshman in college, social interactions, those play dates, those those parties that they would have went to. And now that I'm reflecting on what I experienced even in working with teens through youth ministry, of how many kids I can have, 50, 60 kids in a room together, and these just come up left and right. And so I don't know if you have anything more you want to add to that as we wrap up our Q&A time there. Any other nuggets that have come to mind other than what I've heard today is cutting back on tech, being bold as a parent and checking your own addiction, and then working through that with your kids to help them get away from the technology and fast, knowing that's going to be a stressful micro event, acute stress, but it won't become a long-term one. In fact, it's going to solve the long-term one. I also heard you say that you've got a psychiatrist, and I want to know this psychiatrist personally. I want to refer to them. That is willing to say, let's start here before we go to the medication level and see how that's going to affect them. And not saying that medication may not need to be involved at some point, but we're not starting with that. So is there anything else you want to add?
I think the biggest thing I want to add is, as parents, you can do this.
Okay.
And we lose sight that being a parent is one of our greatest callings in life. We're getting our value from other things instead of from developing relationships with our kids. And be a parent, recognize God has called you to that mission and ministry while you have kids in your home.
Beth, thank you very much. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you for being here with us today. And for you guys here, we're going to take a 15-minute break. For you at home, we're going to take a 15-minute break. You'll see a countdown on your screen at home. We're going to have a chance to get some coffee, interact socially. And we do have, I just want to remind everybody, we do have a lot of air filtration and sterilization going on here. You're welcome to grab a mask if you feel the need for that as well. And for you at home, we'll be back in a little bit with Dr. David Fraze, who's going to be looking at how we can do exactly what Beth was saying there, build some support around us and around our kids to help us push through some of these very short, these acute anxieties and these moments that our kids experience so that we can get to long-term development and health. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us again this morning, both here and online. We're so glad you could be a part of this. Hopefully, in that 15 minutes, your social media didn't suck you back in. I know it was a temptation. You kind of reach for that false buzz sometimes that we feel. Well, Beth set a high bar for us this morning, talking about what we can do as parents and talking about the harsh truth about what social media, what being online and on screens is doing to us and to our kids. It's actually addictive behavior, very similar to any other addiction that we wouldn't want to have in our lives. And so thankful for her for bringing that to us today. But that sets us up for our next topic. And our next topic is really about how we as parents have to build a parenting team. We can't do it alone. We aren't designed to be alone. We're not designed to have to do things by ourselves. And we've got single parents out there that are trying to do it alone. We've got grandparents that are helping out with kids. We've got parents that are busy working, and maybe they're just in and out. Maybe they're swapping. I know me and my wife a lot of times are swapping responsibility with the way that our jobs and our lives are structured. And so our next speaker, Dr. David Fraze, who I actually had the pleasure of meeting in 2001 at a youth conference. And he probably doesn't remember that, but I remember it very well. He was somebody I kind of looked up to while he was working on his D-Min or MDiv at that moment, and then later on working towards his doctorate. He's been working with kids and teens. He was a youth minister for many years. He's been a minister at various different churches, works for FCA, and has done a lot of extensive work there with coaching and learning how to do character development in teens. And has been a huge blessing to the Lubbock Christian University community, as well as all those who he interacts with. And so we're going to welcome to the stage Dr. David Fraze.
He told me I was going to have a walk-up video. It's kind of strange. I should have remembered that. I usually don't get those. Thank you very much. And I do remember that conversation very well. So in Gran Torino, Clint Eastwood is an angry old man that notices the world around him is changing. And he sits on his front porch and he's just staring at people, and all the neighborhood around him changes. Here's a fact. You have never been a teenager in this world. And these teenagers have never been adults. Back in 2020 in Time magazine, a guy named Walter Kern wrote this statement that's really prophetic. He said, in 20 years, what we've determined as adolescents, the way James Dean made famous, he said that 13 to 18 is dying out, and adolescence is going to change into something different. He said 20 years tops. It's 2021, and here's why he said that was going to happen. He said kids are growing up faster than ever, and adults are growing up more slowly. I want you to think about that. I wish I could go into a lot of research discussion. We don't have that time, and you're ready for some good news, but what took us 5 years to get across childhood to adulthood, that time in life where that began in the body, always ends in culture. And here's the questions. Who am I? Do my choices matter? And where do I belong? That used to be a 5-year journey. So when I came off my front porch and went to college when I was 18, my mother made my room into a sewing room. Okay, that's what happened. Today, the parents keep their sheets tight and clean and ready, because the idea today in adolescent culture, when you answer those three questions, is not at 18 or 19, it's the mid-20s. That's not even arguable. That is standard psychosocial research. So in that world, here's the Gran Torino man sitting there going, something is different. Now, I grew up with the front porch. Grew up in Louisville, Texas, right down the road, and what was so interesting about growing up in Louisville is our parents literally let us walk everywhere. We played in the sewers. It was crazy. No one cared. You played until your mom flashed the lights, right? And then you had to come inside. But let's just suppose little David is walking to Central Elementary, and he goes down, if you're familiar with Louisville, on 35. We literally walked on the service road. Crazy. Our parents didn't love us. So we walked down that road. We walked over Fox Bridge, by the Brahms. There was Central. Well, one day we saw these little bitty rocks on the top of the Fox Avenue Bridge. And I don't know about you, but as an elementary school kid, to take a little rock and throw it off the side of the bridge to see if you can hit a car on 35 seemed like great business, right? Somebody stopped and looked at the boys throwing rocks. So I want you to see, for some of you who don't understand the world before 2006 and cell phones, whoever that was, and it still remains anonymous, but she was part of a community. She had to go home, open up the phone book. That's a yellow thing that would come and they would slap on. Now we use it as paperweights, but it was actually everybody's life story in the phone book. She had to find someone she knew that thought was connected to my mom, and so they would call 7 digits, right? And they would say, I just saw these kids. I think this is this kid that lives on Pebblebrook. Oh, Lena's kid. I'll call. That phone hangs up. That mother picks up the phone. 436363436. You know what I'm saying? By the time they're done, and we get to school, we get a call from the principal's office. Mr. Holder, can David, and here's all these guys. We show up in the principal's office. He's a tall man. He has a board that he's slapping against his foot. He's like, boys, we heard something. Well, how did he hear it? Because my mom's already called the school. So by the time I get home, my mother is waiting on the front porch. She knows what she's going to do. Because do you remember the days, whatever happened at school, you're going to get double at home. Now, when that person, this is the interesting part of this world, when that person, whoever it is, and if it's you, I forgive you, but that person that called my mother and said, little David and his friends are throwing rocks at cars on 35 to start this whole domino of consequences, my mother said, thank you. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment because I've been working in youth ministry for 32 years. I work in a public school setting, and here's what we have today. Ma'am, I need to tell you about your son. Sir, can I tell you about your daughter? And it's like, who are you? No, thank you. No, thank you for being part of our family. And if you have video to prove that they did something, that's great. But here's the parent's next move. Okay, so my kid, that's what's going to happen to them. What's going to happen to the other kid? They demand equity. I'm telling you, from our front porch into our world today, things are different. Beth said it earlier, and I'm going to say in a book called The Moral Development of Children, this guy Banks said this, that we lived in a world where church, home, school, and community all surrounded on that front porch to raise that child. That world does not exist anymore. Now you're like, wow, don't cut me off and go to Andy Griffith reruns, please. Okay, that doesn't work. But there's some secret even in the Andy Griffin show. Because Andy was a single parent. And N.A.P helped raise the kid. And whatever that Barney guy was doing with the one bullet, right? And even Otis, the town drunk. Think about this for a second. Otis, the town drunk that would walk into the jail to sleep off a stupor, Andy let speak to Opie. There's something about a community that we need to recreate, but it takes effort. I cannot raise a child by myself. Never have been able to. And we're going to talk about some of those things. Now, we'll see if the clicker works. I think I have some really cool pictures. Boom. Cell phones. We've already talked about that. We're going to end the depression right now. Okay, that's a different world. There's actually a new generation. We're not teaching millennials, by the way, at Lubbock Christian. We are teaching Generation Z. One lady called them the iGen generation. It's because of this thing. Actually, the technology has forced a whole different generation. And now, when we're getting comfortable with the Zs, now they're talking about alpha because of COVID. It's changing very, very, very fast. I want to go back to the boomer days when we just kept a generation for years, right? Now, it's like when the wind blows, there's a different generation. It is a different world. What I believe with the lengthening of adolescence and the changing of all the influences, we have to find a way to bring the front porch back. But it's very, very difficult. I love demotivation posters, don't you? These are fun. Failure when our best just isn't good enough. Isn't that parenting? If you've been parenting for any length of time, I have an older son who's married now, about to have a kid. I have a senior in high school. I've almost been through the whole gambit of raising children. And sometimes I think it's scarier for some of you to be on that front porch watching your kids, right, as adults, because you're like, you're going to make a mistake, but you got to let them make a mistake. But you go through this world and I see my kids do something and I'm like, I screwed up my kid, okay? So go ahead in the audience, look at the people around you. I think I screwed up my kid. Go ahead and just say it. Go ahead, let's have a little therapy. Now, here's the good work. I'm pretty sure our parents screwed us up. The Bible is not filled with perfect families, by the way. Have you ever seen the genealogy of Jesus? Now, if you're someone that is here for the academics and you're not familiar with the Bible story, Jesus' family line had some serious dysfunction. I can't even say it without this being a Netflix MA NC-17 special, okay? There's a lot of stuff going on in that family unit. It's not about our perfection, but here's the way the world used to be before the Andy Griffith Show made famous nuclear family from 1950s to 70s. Do you realize what we have memorialized as that front porch community is only about 20 years old? A family is designed to fit into other families. So that when somebody calls from Fox Bridge and says, David's throwing rocks, they say, thank you. I want to show you these pictures. Go ahead and go to the next one. This is a plane that was ripped apart. There we go. I've given you the sign. The plane was ripped apart by a bear, okay? It's up there in the northern Canadian area. They left their food in the airplane. Don't do that. Well, now you're up there. How do you get out? Watch this. Next slide. Next slide. I think we have one more. Duct tape, baby. Isn't that great? I always have duct tape with me wherever I go. And that's one of the reasons. What if I were to tell you that we can work together, create a community, if you will, of duct tape? I deal with students that are broken every single week. Literally sat with a student last week whose father looked at him in the eyeballs and said, I'm signing off all rights. I don't want you in my life anymore. Now, he knows in his mind that it has something to do with he doesn't want to pay child support. But how does a 15-year-old take that? My dad doesn't want me. So he tried to take his life, and he started talking to a friend, and he had a rope around his neck. His parents, who were very wonderful people, and his stepfather, they very wonderful, but they were all in bed, and they didn't know the depth of this kid's pain. And it's funny enough, it was a cell phone text with a friend, and the friend's like, something's wrong, and he and his mom came over and stopped the suicide ideation. But I'm sitting there looking at this kid, and my arm around him, and he don't want to talk to anybody about it because the pain's so deep. But he'll talk to Coach Fraze. Just a little bit of tape to keep that plane flying. See, we can't do this alone. There are things that my kids will never know until they're older, things that my son still doesn't know, different people in his life, different people in her life. They don't have to know all that I know. And I'm like going, hey, Kevin, can you call? Hey, Bo, can you call? Can you have this conversation? And another bit of duct tape. What are we talking about? Here's the concept. If you go to that next slide. We grew up in a world that says we need to have 2 adults for those 20 kids, 5-to-1 ratio, right? That's what we need. That is an old ratio. Now, you could do old youth ministry that way, Bo, and you could actually stay at Camp Copus down the street if you have a 5-to-1 ratio. 1 adult for 5 kids. Here's the new ratio. Next slide, please, is this one. 5 adults for 1 kid. This is one thing that began to change. A guy named Bill Damon out of Stanford University started talking about the idea of this scaffolding and our need to be congruent in what we're doing morally and what we're doing socially, and we need to focus on these children. He was saying basically we have to bring the front porch community back. And he began to play with these numbers, saying, it's not just I got to be there to sponsor a kid. I got to be there to be sure that she has 5 adults that are speaking life into them, that know their name, that live life with them. We never have the argument. You won't hear it on this stage from Beth, from Kevin, from David, from Bo. We will not make the argument of quantity over quality time. It is a dead argument. You know why? Because you can't have quality without quantity. And you can't build this. Next slide, please. It's called scaffolding. It's one of the most basic tenets of psychology. When we're trying to bring a student from childhood over here into adulthood, it takes scaffolding. And I wish that was mom and dad, but it's not always mom and dad. I wish it was extended family, but it's not always extended family. I wish the front porch was the front porch I had. I wish that home and church and community and school all work together. But if they don't, we have to be sure that is built so that kids have something to fall back on. Because sometimes for the studio audience here, okay, I'm not that great of a dad. I try to be. But sometimes I blow it. Are you with me? My wife is incredible. She's a therapist. She's awesome. But she's not always in her best. And I'm talking to people that feel the same way. Instead of beating ourselves up, realize that's what our mom and dad did. And when they said, hey, go spend the night with your grandparents, they're saying, I blew it. You take care of the kid for 24 hours. They just didn't post it on social media and say that where they were going to eat, right? We've always needed each other. Our view of nuclear family has gone nuclear. Our idea of our independence and pull ourselves by our own bootstraps is not even biblical, church. And it's not even American. It's some weird thing that we created between the 50s and 70s with the Andy Griffith Show, and he was a single parent that everybody was grouped around him too, right? Even the Fonz lived upstairs with his biker gang and could speak truth into the Cunningham children. If you thought about our sitcoms, we won't even go to Dukes of Hazzard. That was strange. Okay, next one. Here's what I want to do. I want to talk about some things intensely practical before our Q&A. What can we do to release the anxiety we have? I've tried to make you feel normal. Our students are very anxious. So what do? Very, very practical. Have conversations with the students around you, your own and others. I remember one thing, and we have a rule in the car. Every once in a while, Dad gets uncool, and I'm like, okay, we're going to go to Sonic. In order to go to Sonic, my phone will be plugged into cool 80s music, but everybody else has to leave your phone. Right, we don't get to text it. Yeah, if you want ice cream, if you want a Sonic run, no technology but my music, and they usually go for it. They enjoy that. One time, my daughter's in the back with a new friend, and they're on their screen. And I'm like, that's enough. They were in 8th grade. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I said, put your phones down. We're going to play a game. We're just going to drive down the road, and you have to, whatever you see, you have to point it out. So they started going, billboard, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I'm like, there you go. Guess what? We started talking. Go to the next slide, if you will. It's an interesting part of the research at Fuller that I'm a part of is they ask a question of how many of you actually had a conversation. I don't know if did they go away? It's not that one, it's the, yeah, there we go. How many of you have had a conversation with your students about why you are a Christian? 0. None of these people we had asked in this one specific group where we were collecting data for Sticky Faith, none of them had told their kids, hey, Bo, this is why I gave my life to Jesus. So you know what I did? Just to be sure, and my kids' eyes rolled in the back of their minds because when I found a different stat, I'm like, Sonic run. And we sat in the car, and I said, I need to tell you why I follow Jesus. And my wife did the same thing. Can you believe that? And then we get all nervous going, hey, well, if I tell them that I was a really uncaged pagan and it was awful and I did some crazy things, maybe they'll do it. No, they won't. They already know you do it. That's the secrets around the dinner table. That's why Thanksgiving's so strange. Go ahead and say it. Why do you do what you do? You have to have conversations. My son struggled quite a bit during his freshman year. And we started a practice that I have with my daughter on Friday mornings, but there's a practice called just taking a ride. My son's very internal. He's not an external processor, and he feels deeply, and it's hard for him to get things out, right, and to have a conversation. So he would say, Dad, can we take a ride? That was the deal. I said, yes. And so I love to talk and figure out and have that quality time, but I started figuring out early it's the quantity, and the quality will just come. And we go through McDonald's, and get this. He would get 2 spicy McChickens and a large Dr. Pepper. I would get 2 sausage McMuffins, McDonald's when you used to serve it at night, bring it back and help my kid, and then a large unsweet tea. To this day, he lives in another town. He said, Dad, can we take a ride? We're going to go to McDonald's. One particular stint when he was really struggling, all I need to have was a conversation. And there's a knock on the door at 11 o'clock at night. I'm already in bed. And my son said, can we take a ride? Guess what my daughter does? Can we take a ride? Conversations. It's so simple, it's ridiculous. You don't have to have a big speech about morality or cell phone use and all this stuff. Just spend time, have those conversations. It's significant. The other one is this, and I think it's important in our world, especially with technology. If you want to get rid of the stress and the anxiety, you welcome the doubts. Okay, 70% of our students will say things like, hey, I got all these questions, I just don't want to say it. They have to have a safe place to say, I don't understand about same-sex attraction. I don't understand about what's going on with COVID. I don't understand what's going on with political parties. I don't know why. You can list all of these things. If we don't have conversations that welcome doubt and let them explore doubt with us within that scaffold community, they're going to pick up their phone and say, hey, Google. And there's a whole bunch of artificial intelligence that will send them down whatever rabbit trail they want and validate their point. So with conversation, welcoming doubt. We can't be like this lady right here, the librarian that's all quiet and tell them to hush. Don't do that. If you don't answer their question, they will find the answer for their question because they're going from childhood to adulthood, and what took you 5 years is about 15 plus. One person threw out the other day, 28's a new 18. I'm not so sure I'm totally there yet. Sounds like a lot, but it makes me nervous. So welcome doubt, have conversation. Another thing is this, family rituals. Family rituals are important. They don't have to be huge. It could be sitting around the table for dinner. I cannot tell you enough how it calms the mind and the soul of our students, of us, to be able to be in one environment without the phone. That's a given here, and just sit. And every once in a while when I have money and my son's in town, I'm like, I want you to cook some steaks, because he's a great steak cooker. He was a chef at one point on his way to his career world. And it just is a moment. Do you see what we're creating here? Just a moment. Years ago, I think it was Carly Dodd that Kevin and I knew way back in the day, traced some problems in the American home to the loss of the family dinner. That's weird to say that could be a ritual, but a lot of our families are so busy going to a practice, doing this. Let's pick up fast food. Just to sit down could become a family ritual. My kids love Christmas. Not because of the presents, but because that's the time we got really way overpriced hot chocolate and just look at Christmas lights since they were kids. And right now, every time they go through some kind of trouble, I want you to hear this. Anytime they go through emotional, anxious trouble, and I simply ask them in conversation, and they began to doubt, I'm like, okay, what are you comfortable? Where's your happy place? Guess what they'll say? I can hardly wait till Christmas gets here. It's a happy place. It's a family ritual that has attained meaning. Here's another one. We're going to fly through these. The idea of guardrails. You know how a guardrail works. You hit those before you go off the side of a cliff. That's it. That's kind of what they're there, to let you know you are about to have bad problems. Now, if you hit a guardrail, you're going to have bad problems. There will be consequences, but it should save you from death. I am amazed. I literally was in a situation the other day where a parent called me and said, I just witnessed this kid called their parents an a-hole. Okay, and I'm like, in front of you? Yes, in front of my ears, and I couldn't help myself, and I had to correct. And the response of the parents was, well, just letting them find themselves and being able to. I'm pretty sure my father would have picked me up in this other side of the room if I said that to my mom. We live in a strange world where people are like, we want our kids to find themselves. We can't. It's called socialization 101. Whatever we give, they're picking up, not just from us, but the surrounding adult community. That's 101. Some research out of Notre Dame that started at Chapel Hill in North Carolina said the number one indicator of a kid's spiritual life is mom and dad. Second, very close to it, very, very close to it, is surrounding adult community. And then people like me are a way distant third. So this idea of guardrails is so significant. It's not just in your home, but it's also for the students that come into your home. It is this community. We had the most uncool house because at 11 o'clock, everybody had to put their phone in a basket. And a lot of the kids didn't want to come over anymore. They'd rather go across the street where it's a cool house. They can have their phones all night and do all this kind of stuff. Guess whose kids end up just being whack jobs? I'm telling you, guardrails are so significant. Now look at this. I don't know if y'all watched the Goldbergs. Next picture, Gloria Goldberg. She is fun. She's the original Smother Mom, as they call her. Great clip. If you ever watch the Goldbergs and you lived in the 80s, you'll be like going, oh my word, that was awesome. People who plow the road for their kids. We used to call them helicopter parents, or they just, they're no longer helicopters. They're called stealth fighter parents. That's what happens, Miss Educator. I'm looking at an educator right now. Here's what happens. You have the greatest district. You're the greatest teacher. You're the greatest coach. You're the greatest everything. I will be your biggest fan. Until you don't start their kid gets a B, something happens not on the team, and they don't go to your lead teacher. They don't go to the principal. They go to the superintendent. All the time. The Today Show, which is usually about a year or two behind everything, said the other day that they call them lawnmower parents. Come on behind me. Here we go. And the inability to let a kid self-regulate, it goes back to a lot of stuff Beth was talking about with the cell phone, but they don't know how to be resilient and self-regulate and handle failure. And that's the next slide, if you would. Failure happens. It happens with us. That's why we just acknowledge that at the beginning. We got to take a deep breath. You will not have a tremendous day every day being a parent. Cut yourself some slack. You're going to run into the guardrail. Okay, that's awesome. You didn't go off the cliff. But teach you a little, I am sorry. 3-letter word. Usually we use it too. I am sorry. There are times that I've gone to my kids, young and old, and say, I blew that. I talked to your mom wrong. I handled this situation wrong. You heard me talk about whatever in the car wrong, because they need to see I hit the guardrail, and they need to see me correcting. And they need to see my wife and I say, yeah, your dad did this, I did, but here's the deal, okay? I know this is all age appropriate, but they know what you do when you close the door and they hear yelling in the other room. So, yes, we have failures. It's not fatal. Say, I'm sorry, move on. But your kids will fail. And I need you to hear this, okay? One of the things of resiliency and the things that Beth and I face, and Kevin, when we work with students, is this. We have not allowed our kids to fail, and when we don't allow them to fail, they don't know how to succeed. They come to college, and they get their first F, and I'm telling you, they freak out, and we have to have a discussion that what they're feeling is not an anxiety disorder, but it's called stress. So what you may want to do is get out of bed and actually go to class. It's a weird concept, but your mom's not going to show up for you. And you're like, are you over-exaggerating this? No. You're like, well, have you done this? Absolutely. My daughter's texting me. And you know if you have a teenage daughter, Dad, all small. Dad, period. Dad, D is now capitalized. Dad, D-A-D, all capitals. Dad. And I'm like, what do you want him in class? And she starts talking about, I had this decision with the job. I had this decision with theater. And I'm like, man, adulting's rough. Brene Brown is good at this. I'm empathizing with her. What are you going to do? Dad, I'm like, no. And then she said, you better not talk to. I said, I'm not going to do anything. And I led her through an adult conversation. Well, what do you need to do? And so in that, failure became success because she did exactly what she's supposed to do. She got an immediate return from a text, and she goes, did you talk to? And I said, no, this was all on you. And all of a sudden, she's like, I just did adulting. It's amazing. My son hated school. Brilliant. Missed one question on the STAR test. One. Hates college. It's like, nope. And that's fine. He decided his senior year, I don't want to go to school anymore. So the week before spring break, sleep in. And Lisa and I do weird things when they're seniors. We tell the school, hands off, we're going to see if they can make it. And so for 2 weeks after spring break, Lisa's a crisis counselor. I'm a coach. I'm like going, hey, dude, promise, do whatever you want to do. Because our goal wasn't to graduate them, but it's to raise a human being with soft skills. So there were some mornings that the graduation coach would just walk in. I'd leave the door, unlock, go, hey, there we go. Lock it when you're gone. Now, in my heart, so I'm like going, oh, my kids are going to fail. My son didn't walk the stage during graduation. Didn't want to. Done with high school. We had a party for him. He didn't care. We had to let go of our loss and grief. It was more important to us than it was to him. Do you see how this guardrails, and it's always a negotiation process. The Bible has this weird verse. It says, raise up a child the way they should go. Which goes back to what? By their particular bend. Which goes back to what? I have to spend time and attention with my kid to figure out what helps them. I need to spend time and attention with other people so they know what makes my kid tick. So do you know what got my kid out of bed after 3 weeks? A football coach that my son didn't play football for 3 years after that, but he loved, and this guy had a relationship, and he walked in with a stack of papers. And like a football coach, he said, I'll be back in 30 minutes for that one. And he walked out of my house, and he came back. I'll be back in an hour for this one. The community, the scaffolding came in that moment of failure, and we had success. A few more things. I'm not even looking at my watch, so that could be fun. Things very quickly. Learn people's names. Kids love that. Another one, intergenerational mentoring. Everybody know who this is. Tony Dungy, in his book, he had a son, he started playing football, and he's like telling his son, you need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to do all this stuff if you want to be a football player. And it was so crazy because he is a Super Bowl coach. It's amazing. And his son's like, no. Finally, one day, he starts sleeping and eating. And he's like, what are you doing? You finally listened to me? He goes, no, my coach told me to do it. Intergenerational mentoring. Let people speak into your life. Give them permission to do that. Another one is this intergenerational service. Now, we do a pretty good job about this in churches now. We need to do a better job in schools. But one of the things that we've robbed students of is the internal idea of service. Now, follow me on this. It used to be a mark of maturity going from adolescence into adulthood is serving outside yourself. Do you know what we did with that as adults? We commoditized it. So that every AP class has to have a service component. If you're part of Christian schools, you can't become a senior at a Christian school until you have so many service hours. What have we done? We basically gave awards for service. That's not how service is done. How it's done is some guy goes, that's older than me, Dave, I need you to come with me to fix this lady's fence. I need you to go with me to go over here and do this. And the next thing you know, Mr. Whoever it is up there, ask me to come and help them. Do you see the difference? Sometimes we have students do things because they make us feel better. What we're finding out is if you serve with students, it is exponential what happens with the support, but also the moral development of these kids. And you create other opportunities for that. Now, next one, intergenerational activities. This is one of my favorites, paintball. I don't know about you, but it's always fun to shoot kids with paintballs. You can do things together. You know, we grew up in a world where we had church potlucks and we had I think we should bring that back. Do things together. They don't always want to be alone because they realize, our students that come into my class realize, even though they have cool little young kids around them, they know it's an exchange of ignorance. They just want to be around other adults so they can ask questions without feeling. They don't want adults to say, well, when I was a kid, but they want to hear when you were a kid. How does that happen? Intergenerational activities, start having a discussion. Next thing you know, the magic happens. You're creating an environment. Then this one, intergenerational groups. It is all right to spend time together. This actually right here, Kara Powell, who's one of the top 40 under 40 in the evangelical world, that's her husband over there. Accountant, the guy next to him is the executive minister, Jeff Matitish at Lake Avenue Church. That's her small group. They don't always do a lot of great study, but they have lots of great experiences in sharing life together. Think about these things. So where do I start? Here you go. I'm going to end with this right here. Start with your friends, family, adults who care, and who your kids like. Here's what I ask my kids all the time. I ask them, I need a list of 5 adults. I still have those lists. Their whole life, and it changed. I'm like, who are the adults in your life that you would listen to? So at different times, when my son graduated from high school, these 5 adults came together and I bought them all steak and I said, would you just speak into my son's life? And there were tears and there was blessing. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't know it was going to be that emotional just because they were selected to be part of the 5. When my daughter moves into high school, I'm like, can you write letters to her so she'll have those, and they keep them. Ask them, who are those kids? Ask your kids tonight. Just say, who are the adults? If it's not us, who would you listen to? Write those names down. And then ask them to begin to speak into your kid's life. Would you show up to their games? Would you just call them? Would you just text them, okay? Snap them if you're really a cool grandparent. Do whatever you could do to be in their world. So that's how you start. So let me give you that illustration of this movie, Up. Remember that? Grouchy old man. He puts balloons on his house and floats away because that happens. I mean, it's a very realistic movie. And this boy is needing a merit badge, right? He doesn't have a father figure. And he gets trapped on the porch and they go with talking dogs. I mean, it's a weird story, but it's great for this next moment. Look at this. He finally gets Helping an Old Man award. And this old man shows up and gives him what badge? Do you remember? It's his wife's badge. The little grape soda thing. It's the greatest moment. So that's it. We have to build scaffolding. There's nothing I gave you that's rocket science, and that's why it's going to work. And it's sad. I'm telling you, you are the program. We are the program. If we're not going to help them, nobody else will, because the phone's not doing a good job. We still have a responsibility. The Bible put it this way. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then it says this. Basically, as adults, you get that inside of yourself, then get it inside of your children. They're watching. It's always been that way, always will be. A couple of resources. If you go to the next slide. This one's coming out, it actually has a lot of great ideas, I think, to help make the scaffolding community. It's coming out in January. I wrote it with Dr. Serdacki from Lipscomb, partnering with your youth minister. It's more than just parents. Parents are used as adults. And then if you are in youth ministry, it's a really handy book, Practical Wisdom for Youth Ministry, that'll help you if you are a volunteer or a team leader. I think you'd enjoy that. All right.
Let's thank David. And just a reminder for you guys here in the room, you can scan the QR code on the back of the chair. There will be one up here on the screen in a little bit. Go through the steps once you've done that to sign in, and then submit message. And for those of you at home, same is true. You should be able to see a QR code on the bottom of the screen. Scan that QR code, follow the steps through the check-in, put your information in, and then you'll go to submit message, and I will get those messages up here. David, thank you so much for being here today. You gave us a whole lot, and I want to come back to a couple things that you said, and I just want to kind of unpack those a little bit more. You used the metaphor of scaffolding. You started with that, you ended with that, and what I hear in that is that the kid is the house. The kid is the structure that's being constructed, that's being built, that we are, in fact, maybe the general contractor. We are the person who has been responsible for organizing all of the people that are going to interact with this structure that's being built. And the metaphor of the scaffolding, this idea that it's not just one thing that's going to be moving around this house as it's being constructed, but it's going to be constructed all around it so that it gets evenly built over time. Is that really what the metaphor is
absolutely.
pushing?
There's, if you're doing construction on this house and you fall, scaffolding, hopefully you'll just fall to a certain level. Something will catch you. And if you look at adolescence as a tightrope, if you will, going from childhood to adulthood, especially in the middle is when you need those balancing agents because it's really swaying back and forth. So sooner or later, failure will happen like we were talking about, and they're going to fall. So they should fall into the care and support of a loving adult community that bounces him back up on that tightrope and says, we could do it, let's keep going.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful thing when it all happens.
Okay, all right. You talked a lot about intergenerational mentoring, service, activities, groups. You covered a lot of different areas. And so for those that may be watching that have that aren't involved in a church community, that don't really, I don't know what that's like because I'm involved in one where these options are much more easy to access. Where are some areas that you see people accessing the intergenerational community outside of a religious group?
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you for that question. So first, intergenerational, if I don't say it, I don't get paid. And so it's not just being in the same proximity with older people and younger people. It's actually interacting. And a majority of my time now in my ministry context is working with athletic teams. And it's amazing how much it doesn't have to do with the actual sport. It has to do with the conversations leading up to the product on the field. A lot of it's being available. So sports teams, theater, band, any of those activities that I think, yes, they're going to be competitive, but they have healthy support structures, I found to be very, very valuable. But it could just be, and this is natural to me, but when adults in a school begin to just maybe leave their tables and walk and talk to the fringes, that is magic. Because those fringe kids, if somebody's sitting over there by themselves, for an adult to come up and say, how are you doing? They'll take
Pay
that
attention
serious.
to them.
And it's authenticity. If it's I got to check this off, I'm shaking your hand because I'm going to get paid for it. They sense that, but authentic adult interaction, and you've experienced this a number of times. I cannot underestimate how thirsty these students are for authentic adults. So most of these kids think, why are you talking to me? Do you want me to play better? Do you want me to perform better? Do you want me to have higher grades? But when adults let's not talk about that right now. How are you doing? We had a young man on our team a couple years ago. His father passed. It was a murder situation. And during COVID, it was awful. And I called his mom and I said, how's such and such doing? And the first thing she said, which is kind of sad, well, we'll get him to practice soon, coach. I'm like, no. Where is he? He's in his room. Go talk to him. Go, what can we do? We can't come to your house. They won't let us, but how are you doing? And that's different.
Right.
She even thought, well, you're just trying to get him. He's a big kid. You're just trying to get him to play. No, how are you doing? He just lost his dad. And that's an authentic interaction.
Gotcha. You also talked about the ratios a little bit. I want to kind of circle back to that for just a second. When I think about our society at the moment, and I think about most kids, I don't remember if you said this or this is what Beth said earlier. I think it was you about teens raising teens. That we have a society where we're really not even at a 5-to-1 anymore. We've got, I would assume, teenagers whose only adult interaction sometimes during the course of a day, especially during COVID, maybe with an adult on the other end of a screen.
Yes.
And then maybe even at school, they don't really interact with their teacher much because they're maybe in a lecture, or like our kids are today, they're sitting with a computer screen in front of them at school, at a desk with a teacher that may never really interact with them on a connection level like you're talking about. And so I'm kind of wondering, how do you get to that 5-to-1, 5 adults, 1 kid, given the way we're structured? Like, where do you see those things happening that maybe in your personal life that you were able to get to that? I think you mentioned, talking with your kids a little bit about that, but is there any area where you see that's going really well?
I think the easiest is if you are a guardian, which grandparents, aunts, uncles, who's ever the guardian of that kid, asking the kid, who do you respect and look up to, is a big deal.
Okay. So making that part of the conversation.
Data mine that.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, who do you listen to? That's huge. But also just for students that we work with, who are the adults in your life? And sometimes you hear a lot more than you want to hear, and kind of brokenhearted stories. But because you ask the question, they'll tell you, and then you have to connect the adults. And it's not like we're going to have a formal mentoring program. Again, the adult response is, let's start a mentoring program. And one thing I hate is, let's take these adolescent kids who don't know who they are and put them with other adolescent kids who don't know who they are, and now we're going to be safe. They need adults.
Yeah.
And so it makes us feel better that we have peer counseling, but they don't know who they are either. And I'm all for that as long as there's a heavy dose of adults. Who are the adults involved? Are adults in the process? We cannot take our hands off the wheel. Beth and I were laughing earlier. When you look at a phone, I think it's the same thing as the formation of a student. It's kind of like giving them the keys to a Ferrari and going, have fun. But we take them to a parking lot with a beat up car first, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
And so I think that's one of those things that we have to ask them. We have to ask them, who is it? Because it is anxious. And I'm going to just say that the simple things that we teach in therapy with anxious kids, breathing and touch, huge.
Yeah.
And I think our kids, especially those who don't have the 5, when you hug them, it's like the world melts away for them. It's like, hey, breathe. It was that way with the kid the other day, going, just breathe. And he looks at me and he's like, oh my word. And it lowers their anxiety.
I loved your metaphor of the duct tape. And I want you to kind of take a second, if you can, to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to tell you what I heard, so to see if this is what you were shooting for. In that metaphor, you showed the plane. It's been destroyed by a bear. We got to get back out. Our life's been destroyed. Our ride, our direction has been altered by something unforeseen. It's coming out of nowhere. And so we look around for things that we have in our life that we can use. We get creative. And then we use duct tape, which it was never its designed intent, or the person didn't have duct tape on them to tape up their plane to fly home. I guarantee that.
It's a lot of duct tape, Bo.
It's a lot of duct. I'm impressed that
Very
they had that much duct tape.
It must have been a youth ministry.
Or it must have been during COVID, because,
Making duct tape wallets.
That's it. What else? Everything else is stuck in a supply container somewhere off the coast of L.A. And so, use what you got, right? And I think I heard you say, use what you got. It's not the perfect substance, but it will do the job, and it will do it better than you think it will.
Yes.
Is that?
Absolutely. We're trying to get them off the ground, right? And so you use whatever you got. And I think sometimes if you talk to counselors, and you're one of those, and I have enough to make me dangerous, and Beth is, Kevin is, okay, you just brought a bunch of counselor people here. Just realize that.
Don't tell
okay,
them.
So if we could get people talking, just interacting, you wouldn't have near as much business.
It's true.
And that could be a simple bit of duct tape, because I work with professional people, and it's amazing to me that I could bring in a professional football player to talk to my football team. They're like, but they'd rather hear from me, and I've never played in the league. It's because it's relationship. They may be a more polished speaker, but they know me, and it's like, well, Dave put duct tape on me. So we always look for the grand and glorious, and I think I said this more than once, the program's the person. They really do want, especially middle school age kids.
Authenticity.
It is. No matter how dysfunctional, this blows me away, in the literature and in the social science, that in the especially the middle school ages, the number one player in a kid's life is their family, no matter how dysfunctional. So a little bit of attention goes a long way.
So a question from one of our parents online. What is the best way to build the scaffolding when parents don't know backgrounds of other adults, parents that our kids interact with on a day? So heaven help me, my son, I ask him this question when I get home, who are the adults? And he lists the name of an adult that I go, I either don't know that person or I think to myself, heaven help me, I don't want them around that person.
Okay, here's old school. You got to get to know the other adult. And this is crazy. One of the adults that my son will always say is significant in his life is attached to a very toxic family.
Interesting.
And I know that. And I think he knows that. But this person is not toxic within that. So for a long time, I'm like, okay, when we have these gatherings, this guy can speak into you, but these people aren't going to be around. And my son knows that.
So you're filtering.
Absolutely. Especially younger ages, it's our job to filter.
Well, sure.
When they get older, they're going to choose a lot of different ways, but you still keep asking those questions. And I think I'm looking at a bunch of uncool parents. Hopefully you're uncool. Just because the kid's like, hey, come over and do it all-nighter. My kid doesn't get to go over to somebody's house unless I know the family. And most of the families, you're like, hey, thank you for asking. Isn't that strange? I mean, we kind of know that. Mm-hmm. Churches, schools, sports teams, band, theater, and I'm using activities, but it doesn't have to be things that are typical. It could be, and this is interesting to me, technology, and I know Beth talked about it, we had to reinvent all of that in youth ministry, and some of the things we did at our church that was great is basically everybody grab your favorite food, we're going to be online for an hour, and everybody pop up windows, and so we actually used technology for a meet and greet, and they wanted to be together, but it was part of that scaffolding. Kids started realizing that's my youth minister, that's all this. And so it was a cheap substitution, but we actually used technology during that time just to remind kids that they're not alone.
So I got, this is an interesting one from another parent. Heaven help you on how you answer it.
That's a horrible setup.
I love this setup. This is great. No, this is perfect for you because, I don't know that anything's ever come at you that you weren't able to at least get your head around at some point here.
Way too big of a setup.
And I've had this kid in the youth group before, not this particular one, but this type of kid, as I imagine you've had as well. The one that's really smart, that's really intuitive, that really, is almost like you would want to put them in charge of things, And so what do you do when you ask that kid that question, that who are those 5 people? And they look back at you and go, those people are worse than any other people that I know. Those people are not good peers. There's nobody around me that's the type of person, mom or dad, that you would want me to have in my life. What do you think you do there?
Well, 2 things. I'm reminded of one. I still have in my office desk a picture from one of them. He was that kid, and he didn't want to be around anyone. And some of it was him because we did have a lot of good kid options. He just didn't like them. So I'm going to answer 2 parts. The ones who just didn't like them, I said, why don't you sit in the back? What do you like to do? I like to draw. Well, during the lessons, why don't you sit back here and just draw what I'm saying? And he had the most beautiful drawings. And next thing you know, he's like, I made you a drawing. It sounds like I'm doing Napoleon Dale. I made you a drawing. And I have all these drawings. And he started connecting, and he's still connected to an adult. There are environments, and I could think of a kid, and I'll go ahead and say it because if he's watching, be a hoot. We've known him since he was 15, and he showed up at church. I think I accidentally dropped him off at a place and he bought cigarettes. Long story. But he came from such an environment, Bo, that he had nothing.
Okay.
He thought the F-bomb was hello.
Okay.
But he kept coming because there was a warmth. He sensed something authentic. And that's what I love about youth ministry. If you can find something that they feel connected to, that's authentic and safe, we call it the safe place. What started happening was we'd go through Starbucks, dropping him off at his home, and he would just cry. It was really weird. He goes, I don't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. He still calls me. He called me 2 weeks ago. Dave, got to let you know what's going on. And he's probably 26, 27, but was raised in a very rough part. So if there's one adult that can reach out, and you've done this more than once, to just say, hey, just keep coming and see what happens. They may sit in the back, they may draw pictures, but they begin to change. Now, here's the scary part for whoever that is. When they're in high school, they go to battle with who's around them.
Yeah.
And you ask an awful lot, and this is for all of us. Middle school is about peer pressure. High school, they don't care who popular is, okay? It's not about peer pressure anymore. They don't do things because everybody else is doing them. They're doing it because their friends are doing them, that close group. And to ask someone to leave that group of support, which is survival to them, to go find another group is difficult. And that may not happen until they're 21 years old.
Yeah.
But all we do is we keep, and this is how identity is formed. They got to hear our voice over and over again. Bo, you're loved. Bo, you're special. Bo, you're loved. Bo, you're special. It may be my voice as a parent telling that kid over and over again till finally they understand it. But hopefully there's a community that can go around. They may not even know the people yet. But if this person writing it, do you know another healthy adult? Another important thing to hear here. The number one influencer of a kid's life again is an adult, not a kid. Kids are still like 6 and 7 down on the list. You're like, are you kidding me? They don't want you to know, but we really do have a great voice. They want us to look them in the eye and say, you're enough. And if we can get other adults to do that, it's awesome.
Two other things real quick here. So one, you mentioned welcoming the doubts. And what I hear in that is, and I hear this a lot from parents that I work with either here at the church or in the counseling practice, that their kids doubt the system. Maybe they doubt the system of school. Why am I going to do all of this in order to get into college, and college isn't going to X? Or maybe they doubt faith, or maybe they doubt their relationships. And what I hear in parents, and again, this is part of this, again, being a non-anxious presence, is they hear those doubts, and I think they hear failure on their own part. And can you speak to a little bit how, you kind of said this, we didn't grow up like these teens are growing up. They're growing up faced with a lot more information at them. And what I would assume is we should expect them to have doubts that we never had to deal with. Is that?
Absolutely. You can find a platform and validation for anything you believe.
Which is something we wouldn't have been able to do.
Not at all. And that's why we need to be able to voice those and be able to have the conversation. You mentioned non-anxious presence. Technically, the more anxious we are, the more anxious they're going to be. That energy spreads, and then we're crazy. We end up getting upset. Especially men, we understand the price tag and we understand performance. My dad grew up in a world where stability was the mark of a good man. Our world that you and I are raising kids in is you got to be a success. Well, what has that led to? Very stressed out young people. In the 1950s, the number one group, according to David Elkind, that received psychotropic drugs were the women, because they had to be, those ladies they see on TV. The number one psychotropic drugs today, as you know, are our kids. David Elkind said all of that stress and pressure, especially from the father figure, has created cracks. So we could figure out what we wanted to do. Freedom to express and explore. Our kids are pushed at an early age. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You got to go to this STEM school. You got to do all this kind of stuff. They need a little bit of breathing room. Easier said than done.
Sure.
Because it is a system. So all of us who are educators are like, yes, we're pushing back against the system. Now, as an adult non-anxious, 2 illustrations that'll help. When you taught your kid to walk, they took 2 steps and they fell on their face. And you still took those pictures and called everyone, my kid's walking. They were falling with strategy. They weren't walking yet,
Right.
But you were so excited.
Right.
If you were to pick them up because, oh my gosh, they're crying, you would still be carrying your 25-year-old, and it'd be really awkward and we'd make fun of you. That's one thing. You gotta let them fall. We've done that their whole life. The other thing for anxiety, when a kid would fall on the playground, and I'll say this, a parent who's non-anxious, even if the kid's like bleeding and his kneecap's over here and is like, hey, look, mom, and his leg's over here. If the mom or dad go, oh, wow, you had a little fall. Wow, that's something. They'll go, yeah, and their leg's hanging over to the side. But if the mom goes, oh, baby, that kid loses it. I mean, we know that
Sure,
as parenting.
right,
Same
right.
thing is about these questions. They're going to ask you some big ones. So if you sit there and just start sweating, if you're authentically sweating, go, dude, this is a big one. But then you look at it and say, I'll walk through this with you. I don't have the answer. Let's figure this out together. That's better than going, go ask your father. You know, I mean, it's huge. How we react to their questions, more important than the answer to the question, is how we react. We can figure out the answer.
So tell me, and this will help me in my role here. So I'm going to jump into the question because this is one I have. So let's say that my son comes to me with a doubt. What I coach people to do is to not pass that kid off to another adult. So if a kid's come to you and asked you a question, don't pass them off to somebody. I can't do that. That's above my pay grade. Because what I hear from kids is, they can't handle me.
Yes.
And so what I always coach them to do is go with them. So I'm going to go with you. We're going to go talk to the expert over here. We're going to go find Kevin. We're going to go to a counselor together. We're going to go somewhere together and explore that together. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And allowing that space for that doubt to play out rather than to criticize the doubt. You're dumb for doubting. You're dumb for not just getting in line. And I think we tend to kind of get into the fear mode sometimes where that's what plays out. And so I'm assuming when you're talking about giving space for that doubt, it's not necessarily, using your scaffold, let's hand them over here for this person to talk to them. Although there's times that's appropriate, but it's to go with them in their doubts.
And that should be in your head. Who can be the resource? What could happen here? But they know when you're like, hey, just go do that. Go do that. Go do that. And that increases frustration. It decreases authenticity. And it also creates suspicion in the system. You know, questions of faith. If we're like, well, we don't talk about that there. Suspicion in the school. Why do we have to do this? Create suspicion. You have to express and explore doubt. And they understand in their world today. And I know this is a big topic. But if you set a standard of civil discourse, I do this every semester. We're going to, everything is fine. We can talk about anything. We're going to have civil discourse.
Safe conversation
This
space.
is a safe place.
Okay.
Most people will say, okay, I get it, because you've opened yourself up to it.
And you need to follow through.
You better follow through. Because if you don't follow through, then you get put on social media. But, I mean, that's an important thing to follow through, and to go with is a great thing, yes.
And your final point, or final thought that I want to go over with is the idea of the guardrails. And so, mentally, I think about driving down a road, and I think about all the places that I see guardrails. And I think about places that I don't see guardrails that I think there really should be a guardrail here, right? Like there's that seems a little bit risky, maybe driving through Colorado and you look off the edge of a cliff and you think to yourself, that cliff's right there and there's no guardrail. Now,
you're such an adult now. That's
I know,
funny. We would never have this conversation 20 years ago.
Right.
You just kind of drive by there going, look
at
that.
Yeah,
look at that river
yeah.
down there. Yeah. So you have wisdom. Yes,
so this idea of guard. But here's the thing, and I think this may be a struggle for us parents in this. Maybe you could speak to something about this. But I would never coach my kid to go run into a guardrail. I would never just go hit a guardrail just for the sake of hitting a guardrail. I understand the principle that will cause a problem, which is less severe than the problem that would happen if the guardrail wasn't there. Going off a cliff into a river, something like that. It's designed to stop. How do we allow kids to hit guardrails and not freak out that they hit a guardrail?
Well, there's two things. One, I'm going to go way back in time. I heard this phrase a long time ago by, I think it was Josh McDowell or rules without relationship equal rebellion.
Discipline without relationship equals rebellion.
And so
yeah.
If you're setting up guardrails and you don't let your kids know why and they don't trust you, they're going to run into them anyway, and it's going to be kind of comical. So rules without that relationship equal kind of rebellion situation. So if you've had a relationship with your kid and they're used to that authenticity, you can say, hey, it's like Beth was saying, I want your phone is going to be here until you're this age. And they're going to be upset when you look at their stuff. They're going to say, well, these are my conversations. And that's a guardrail. Mm-hmm. Well, because eventually they're going to have to build their own guardrails. So our guardrails are meant to, in relationship, to instruct. We're raising a human being, an individual. So from childhood to adulthood, individuation's the big fancy word. It's an individual. They have to learn how to do this for themselves. So if we just set up guardrails and they never make a decision for themselves and they're never allowed to fail and they come to Lubbock Christian University, they will have a hard time. Because kids who are not able to set their own resiliency and to fail, they do not do well because they go totally crazy.
They can't handle the stress.
No, they're like alcohol, sexuality, whatever. Like, let's just go, because they've never been, they don't understand the purpose of the guardrails. They don't understand why, if we're here, why can't we go over there? So it's a relationship dance, and kids have different guardrails. If you have more than 2 kids, you understand. Some kids you can look at and they just crumble. The other kids you got to beat a little bit. Not really. Man, angry viewers. There's different. They're by their own particular bend. Mm-hmm. But why is the guardrail there? Is it there just because? And if they push back with their questions and doubt, that is a great opportunity. Now you got 2 speakers saying that is an opportunity to have discussion. Why do you think we want your phone here? Why do you got to be in at 10? Why do you have this? And as you're growing an adult, it's part of having that discusis Now,
I love how you say that. I love how you say that. We're not raising kids, right? We're raising adults.
We are, and they got to learn how to do it. So I have to, this is what I tell my athletes when they're losing their jump: breathe and tap. Find a reset. We got to do that as adults, because your kids are going to, when you become authentic and safe.
So
what in the world did you just ask me? I mean, that's what you're saying in your mind, going, where, go talk to your mom. I mean, that's what you're thinking, but you cannot, you got to listen. You know, that's what car rides are for when you're going to the office going, did my kid just ask me that? Did I break them? That's all normal, but I got to breathe and tap so I can engage with them, find the resources and go with them, because we're raising adults.
So one of the things, and I don't remember the other words you used, but you talked about how this generation's being raised to be successful. As it turned to the 1950s, back in stability, that was the other word there. And so one of the things that I think is interesting about our culture, and I want to know if you have a way that you do this with your kids, or the way you coach others to do this, is when and how do you determine whether or not your kid, your teen may need a professional to assist them in something? And so I hear the 5 adults in their life being relational adults, maybe grandparents, or maybe somebody they're already in a relationship with at their church or their school or on their athletic team. But how do you know when it's like, okay, we actually need to bring in a therapist, or we actually need to bring in a medical doctor, or we actually need to bring in I just think about all the different ways we bring people in, and we don't really think about it. We bring in.
I think you answered your question by, and this goes back to the idea of my kids don't need to know all the people we talk to. Part of a scaffolding community, and you'll see this in that book on
when it comes out in January,
is there are individuals in our life that have gone before us. There have always been a group of parents, and I'm like, I have no clue what to do with my kid right here. And so I would call them and say, what do you think a good consequence is for this? My mom and dad, my dad died the first year of our marriage, and mom died recently, and she had Alzheimer's. So, we haven't had that. So we've had to rely on different adults. And we're so rich in that regard, because our kids go through something. I'm on the phone calling my friend going, so what do you think? And
so you're not afraid to be vulnerable?
Not at all. Because I'm a doctor. My wife's a master's. She's an LPC. I mean, we have training in this. But I think people need to hear. I mean, we got a lot of book knowledge up here. But when it's your kid, you still got to breathe and tap, because the emotions are different. And you have to let people speak into your life. And you have to be able to do that. And that's hard, that vulnerability. I've looked at some of my friends. They've looked at me, and they said, Dave, you're gone too much. Or, Dave, why are you doing this? Why did you speak that way? I've had difficult conversations to say, I noticed this in your kid, and you asked me to be part of your family. And guess what? He's not doing well over here, and I think I know why. How are you doing with your wife? Now, that really will ruin a Sonic run, but for that moment, that's how you connect the scaffolding. I mean, literally the people you've invited here on this stage. Kevin and I have been friends a long time. Beth has had my kid in class. You and I have been friends. We've had conversations, even if they're passing, about what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What are you doing? And they become resources. They may be lower level on the scaffolding, but eventually you may need to move them up to the scaffolding because we build that stuff.
Right.
But you always be vulnerable. We don't do this alone, and that's the whole point of this session. If you do it alone, we got to bring the front porch parent. You can't do it alone. Right. You got to invite people to your front porch, which is an ugly place sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. David, thanks for being here. Let's give David a round of applause. We will be back here at 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. Central Time, back on live stream and back here in-house. And so have a good lunch break. Hopefully you will do some actual human interaction and see if you can figure out who's the scaffolding around you, who can help be that structure that your kid can lean on, build their house upon. Thanks.